As you recall, back on January 17th, we made a trip out to the Travis County Audubon Society property, the Blair Woods Sanctuary. Just to refresh your memories, here's our group photo. And at the conclusion of our walk, we said, the whole idea of the walk was to try to start putting together a plan for how to do an archaeological survey of the property. And one of the ideas that Tiffany had suggested was that we use maps and aerial photographs to maybe identify some high priority points. There's 10 acres, but there may be places that we should focus on. So I have distributed a 1937 Tobin aerial photograph that includes the Audubon property. And a year ago, I also sent a link in the email. A year ago, after we first got the Tobin aerial and we had made our first trip out there, I did a short video looking at that 1937 aerial. So in this video, I'm going to look at it again, but with an eye towards points that to me seems like maybe high value targets for looking at. To get you oriented, so here's the Google Earth as it looks today. And just a couple of, so here's the entrance, of course, the Blair house, the outbuildings, the pond that's formed by the spring, etc. But so this road right here, the importance of which will be cleared here in a second. This is Old Fort Hill Drive, and it's named because they thought the old fort was up in here somewhere. The original 1936 marker, when they put it out, was, and you have to keep in mind MLK was not here, was roughly here. And that is based on archaeology reports where they reference the 1936 marker with respect to where the marker is located today. The story is that back at some point, this was all field, they lost the marker, they refound the marker, and they moved it down to this location. One of the questions that had come up as we did the walking tour was, do we have a clear idea of the property boundaries? And yes, we do, and that is going to be why Old Fort Hill Drive comes into play. If you go to TCAD, it's just to make sure, I went to TCAD and looked at the property boundaries. So 4 of the sides of the property are very well defined by what's out there today. So this side, right in here. The other one is the division between the Audubon property and the neighbor's property. And if you look on TCAD, you can tell where that's at. You can tell where that boundary is at in reference to Old Fort Hill Drive. It's just a shade to the east of there. And then the other thing is, in Google Earth, when you draw a polygon, as I've done here, it calculates the acreage. And this is a 10-acre polygon. So we've got a pretty good idea of what the property is. That's the scope of what we're trying to survey. Next thing, I'm going to turn on the 1891 Travis County map that shows property owners and zoom out here a little bit. This map has been manually georeferenced on top of Google Earth, but it gives you an idea. And one of the bits of importance here is that, as we noted in the report, this section south of here appears to have been a freedman colony that hasn't been recognized so far. And included in that, this property, you can't read it, but this is a school lot. right here. So I'm going to turn that on, and apologies to Lanny if I've got it a little off here, but I think in one of his things he said the school lot may have gone a little further, but you get the idea. It's on the southern bound of the property. I'm going to zoom out here a little bit so you can maybe read a little better. This is Mrs. J.W. Tilapapi. They were the owners. She bought the property excuse me, in 1884, working from memory here. And as we've subsequently learned, there's a family write-up her daughter put on file in the Austin History Center. So George Tilapapi worked at the GLO when he retired, and they moved onto the property after retirement in the 1888, somewhere between 84 and 88. So one of the so here we are today again, Audubon property and the approximate area of the school lot that was south of there. So for reference, when we did our hike back in January, I carried the GPS and just kept it on to log everywhere we had walked or where I had walked. So this it right here, the X is the starting point on our hike. That's the parking lot. So as we go through here, I'm going to point out some points here in a second, but that just kind of gives you an idea of the area that we covered in our walk. So now I've turned on the 1937 Tobin aerial. So keep in mind, and if you watch the previous video from a year ago, it kind of gives you some of the lay of the land. But just some of the high points, no MLK back in the day. This is Weberville Road. This is the Path of the Pioneers. The original entrance was here off of Weberville Road. Here's the school lot, and you notice there is a road going in here. In 1937, it looks like there may be a structure in here. But school lot, Audubon property. And again, if you load this into Google Earth, it's already georeferenced, and you can do things like tilt it. And I generally turn on exaggerated elevation so that you can see high spots. Okay, here's the property and where we walked. So I'm going to leave the property boundaries on that and start looking at some things that I think are interesting about the property. Just for reference, so on the 1937 image, there's the parking lot today. So as you can see, the parking lot is basically right on the old road into the property. And as I've noted before, what I find striking about this photo. So remember, in 1937, Old Fort, Colorado was about 100 years, had been about 100 years before. So depending on how much the land changed from farming, etc., this may be the best thing we have to work from to tell what the layout looked like back then. I also wonder if had they had, and I don't know if they did or not, but had they consulted the 1937 Tobin when they did the archaeological work, had they consulted the Tobin, and maybe they did, I don't know. I wonder if they actually had done the archaeological work other than where they put the marker. There are lots of disturbed areas, and one of the things that I keep coming back that I find interesting is if you notice the road in off of Weberville Road goes directly to the house and the springs. The springs are in here. Kind of disappears under the growth of the trees, but then a trail or road picks up on the other side and continues to go up. This is upslope here. There was something here, water cistern, I don't know, something up in this area, and then a path that goes down into the creek area. There's a path that comes back around this way. So I wonder, you know, if this predates the farm, if maybe the fort was up in this area. Anyway, just speculating now. So first suggested area we might look at. We've got the school lot down here that butts right up to the Audubon property. So I would say the fence line, this area down here, in particular down in this area, there appears to have been something. There's some worn areas, and I don't think this is trees. He had, it almost looks like water in the aerial, but at any rate, there's obviously some worn areas in this thing, and this is down along the property line. So I'd say that was a candidate. The next very obvious place, of course, is the spring itself. So you see, this is where we were, this is where the concrete looking natural, well, there is some actual concrete footing stuff down in the creek bed, but this is the main spring cropping. And I think Tiffany walked a little bit up into this area and said that she saw spring, evidence of spring bubbling out up in here. So this area. Next to the spring, between the house, as it drops off from where the house is at down to the spring area, there is a dry stack wall and a gate. It makes you wonder, maybe the gate was associated with this continuous road that seems to pass through here. So the dry stack wall, Germans, of course, built lots of dry stack walls. That was a common thing they did to keep cattle out of an area. And I don't think we looked at it, but I believe there is a gate. There is a gate up there, a more modern gate, but at any rate. So that would be another area. Up from the spring, again, there's this road that appears to be a continuous road or trail that came in through the springs and onto somewhere up this hill. So I would say it would be interesting to try to go back and look at where that trail is actually at. So if you look at it today, that's the trail from the spring. So here's the gate, spring, going up like this. And the trail goes off into here somewhere that's in the subdivision now. Off of the trail, we've got a bright spot over here. I'm going to call it an unidentified field object. And I can't tell if it's casting a shadow or not, but again, maybe take a look at this. Up in this same area, we have what appears to be a swale of some kind, of swale or a ditch that runs down here. I don't know if that's natural or man-made. I guess it's man-made. Anyway, I would say that would be interesting to look at. The other obvious place to look is this is where we had the flint core that they showed us, the one that kind of naturally worked itself out of the ground. It was up in this area. And this is, in general, if you flip this guy around, So if you flip this guy around, you know, we started at the spring, backtracked on the trail, walked up like this, and this is where the flint was found. And you'll notice that this is kind of there's a high ground area that kind of overlooks the creek. Some disturbed area in here. So I'd say high ground overlooking the creek. Turning attention more to the southern boundary, in the 1937 photograph, there was another building out there that, I'll pull this away so you can see it better. So to orient you, here's the parking lot today, the Blair House, the two outbuildings we looked at. There was another building, barn, that was down in this area. And if we put our tracks in there, you can see we've walked right by it. We've walked right by it, and this is the area that it was in terms of today. Here's the pond, of course. So whatever old building that was, the other thing that jumps out at me is, so here's the dairy barn, Blair House dairy barn, is there was a lot of disturbance around the dairy barn. Presumably, if you remember, there's a trough that runs through the dairy barn, and presumably they pushed stuff out the back. But something else is going on down in here. It's very worn, so that would be a great place to look. Also, again, this is the entrance to the property. I think it would be, in the parking lot is right in here. I think it would be interesting to see if we can find any remnants of the old entrance, materials discarded from wagons or whatever that may have come in that way. Then finally, we have down on this edge of the property, this trail that seems to come in from the west. And again, this to me seems to be part of a larger entry, springs, continuation up the hill, up to whatever this was, cistern or something, down the hill, and a continuation like this. So it may be interesting to have a look over in this area. And finally, not to ignore the obvious, as Tiffany, I think, had noted, the house and the barns that we know are still there. Looking, climbing underneath here. We've been in the attic, but maybe some test pits, metal detecting around these structures. We know on this building right here, for example, when we flipped over the stones that are being used for the entrance, they're hand done, hand carved limestone. So one of the interesting things I find about the house, an interesting thing I find about the house is that in most of the photographs, this one included, the house clearly looks like it's a rectangular structure. Whereas when the consultant, and when you indeed get up in the attic, there looks like an L-shaped structure. So I'm kind of wondering if actually there isn't three phases to the construction of the house. There was a rectangular thing that then got built onto as an L shape, and then later added on perhaps by the Blair. In fact, probably when you look at the Blair, they bought the property in 51, and when you look at the photos in the 50s, you can see it looks like construction's going on the house. So anyway, that's it. I look forward to seeing what you guys come up with.